Hello friends, it's that time of year, mid-year book freakout tag / stats check-ins. We've got a lot to cover here in this video. I'm gonna try and not ramble like I usually do, if that's even possible. And we're gonna get through these questions. Now, as a note, I have tagged down the original creators of this tag, and I've also tagged Kayla from Books and Lala because her questions are the ones that I'm using. I'm not sure how many of these are original to her and how many are original to the original tag. Those are the ones I'm using. First things first, the questions, and then we'll get to stats. Number one, how is your reading going? It's going good. It's going really good, actually. I have read a lot of books this year, probably the most I've ever read since I've been tracking my reading. I maybe read more when I was a kid because I was reading smaller books, and also I didn't have anything else to do. So I've read a lot. And also I've managed to finally find like the perfect balance between having a set TBR and like something that I need, like a goal and books that I need to get to. How did you get that, you little turkey? This was in a book on a shelf. It must have been hanging down and he pulled it out. You're so bad. You're so bad. I finally have a mix of TBR and mood reading. So I've built into my schedule allowances for reading books whenever and not reviewing them. And that's really freed up a lot of like pressure from me. Not having to review everything means that I can just read and not worry about it. And also I love DNFing so much. Why didn't I do it sooner? I'm not spending time on books that are mediocre when I could be reading other better books. So it's been great. Overall, my reading is great. Best book I've read so far. I'm surprised by this. When I went through all the books that I've read, which are a lot, as you'll see, this is the only one that I could really it stood out above all the others. When you see my number, you'll understand. But that's The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Katherine Arden. So I, as it turns out, really freaking love this book. And I'm really glad that I read it, and I'm definitely going to have to reread it before the end of the year. Katherine Arden is a fantasy author. She's most well known for writing the Winter Night trilogy, which takes place in medieval Russia and is also a fantasy book. This book is also historical fantasy, but instead of medieval Russia, it takes place in, is it France? I think so, in World War I. The war itself isn't really part of the book. What we have instead is the effects of the war on the human soul is what this book is about. And also World War I was a real turning point in terms of the modern world and history. And a huge part of this book is dealing with the world changing around these people, and are they going to move forward with it, or are they going to be stuck in the past? So the thematic, just the whole thing works so beautifully together. I tabbed so many different parts, and it is also got 2 love stories in it. It's queer. Well, the 2 main characters are a brother and a sister. The sister is a nurse. She has recently come home from the war, and then she witnesses a famous explosion that happened in Halifax during this time. She actually ends up going back to the war with 2 friends. And one of them has a son who died, and the other one just sort of wants to come along, and they decide they're going to be nurses too and help her set up this charitable hospital to help wounded soldiers. And they all have PTSD, everybody in this book. And then also what's going on is the main character, whose name is Laura. She has a brother. Brother's name is Freddie. And Freddie has gone missing. The way he's gone missing is, I'm not going to spoil, but it involves a supernatural being and also bombs in the war and trenches. This book was just every single part of it was so good. I don't know how to explain why I love it so much, but the look at what war does to people, I think, is what really sold this for me. The central relationship between Freddie and this German soldier that he is trapped with underground was so good, and the depictions of trench warfare were so intense. You got to know going in, this is historical fiction, and the fantasy element is tertiary, but it's also the book wouldn't work without it. So I don't know, it's really hard to explain. Just know I gave this 5 stars, and it's my favorite book of the year so far. Best sequel. So this is a book that I was highly anticipating, and I was very worried would not live up, because one of my favorite books of all time was the first book, and then the second book was a little bit of a disappointment, so I just needed it I just needed it to end strong. And that's The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. This book did everything I needed it to do and more in order to thematically wrap up Jade's story. So this is the third book in the My Heart is a Chainsaw series, also called the Indian Lake trilogy. It's too hard to explain, but if you like stories that are very meta and very character driven and very where you're in the character's head and explorations of trauma and society failing people, but then people coming together anyway and providing support for each other, but also you like lots of blood and guts and meta stuff and references to slashers. Just an author having a fun, but also saying something important at the same. What was that? It sounded like one of the cats barfing. I'm like traumatized from their barf. What was that? What'd you do? It's dinner time, so they're acting up. Anyway, this was perfect. I loved it so much. I can't wait to eventually reread this trilogy in full. Favorite reread? I'm not going to talk too much about this. Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I started my reread of this series in prep for the TV show in August, which is in like 4 days now as of filming this. So I'm very excited about that. I do need to read books 2 and 3, but I'm in not really a hurry. I just wanted to make sure and get this one reread before the show started. This is actually the British version. If you are going to read this and it's possible for you to get your hands on a copy of the British version of the story, I highly recommend that you do that. I originally read the American version of this book, and it is not as good. I gave it 3.5 stars originally, rounded up to 4, and this is a 5-star book. So the American editors, they were okay for books 2 and 3, probably because the author realized what they were going to do to her story, but they absolutely butchered some stuff trying to Americanize a very British story, and it was awful. But this is a really good book, and I really enjoyed myself. Can't wait to see how I feel about books 2 and 3 on reread. New release you haven't read yet but want to. So there's 2. This question and like another question are like the hardest questions. So I just forced myself to pick 1 or 2 books for each question. And for this question, I have chosen The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh and The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. So these books in particular, this one I was going to try and get to this month, and I wasn't able to. This is the 3rd book in this Jane Austen mystery series that Claudia Gray is writing, where she continues the story of the original Jane Austen books, but turns them into murder mysteries where characters are either murdered or accused of murder. Like in the first book, it was Mr. Wickham who was murdered, and he's a bastard. And in this one, it is Lady Catherine de Bourgh, the infamous villainess from Pride and Prejudice, who tries to stop Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet from getting married, who gets her due. Now, I don't know if she's murdered, because the synopsis says that somebody's trying to kill her. I really like this series. It's a lot of fun, and I want to get to it soon. And then everybody has been talking about how good God of the Woods is. Oh, my tea. Hold on one second. Got my Murderbot mug. Let that steep for a little bit. Probably stupid to put this right near all my favorite books. Anyway, as I was saying, everybody's saying how good God of the Woods is. And I feel like these people just didn't read her previous books, and this one's just popping off for some reason. But the, what's it called? Which is just straight up literary fiction. The Unseen World. And then Long Bright River, which is a literary mystery. And both of those are 5-star books. So I knew this was going to be good. But everybody, it seems, is discovering Liz Moore now, which I'm happy for her because she's a great writer. But I'm very excited to get this. This is actually a book club for my book club for next year in March. So like I want to get to it soon because everyone's talking about it and I want to be part of that. But also at the same time, like if I read it now, will I remember it by March? I don't know. We're going to see, but I really want to get to it soon. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year. This is an impossible question. I have so many books that I'm looking forward to, but the ones that I pulled out of the pile the most are, of course, Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, which is book 5 in the Stormlight Archive. The last book in the first half of the Stormlight Archive, which is like the first arc of the story is 5 books. And then the second arc is there's going to be a time jump. And then there's going to be in the future 5 more books. Dropping everything release date to go buy that book. I didn't even want to pre-order it because I want it in my hands and I want it and I'm going to read it that day. And then I also pulled out, weirdly, The Impusium, which is a literary horror story by Polish author Olga Tokarczuk. And I have not read a single book from this author, but she is a genre hopper. She always writes literary fiction, but then she hops from subgenre to subgenre. And she did mystery Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead is a book I'm reading next month, and it's a mystery book, but it's literary mystery. And I just get the feeling that I'm going to love it. And I really think I'm going to be into her whole thing. And then when I saw that this book was being translated into English and published, I got really excited because it's Olga Tokarczuk doing horror. And it takes place in a asylum for people who are infected with tuberculosis, which is fascinating to me. So, and this cover is impeccable. Come on, look at this thing. I'm very excited. And then the last book, probably, again, there's so many that I could be choosing from, is The Mercy of Gods by James S. A. Corey, which is the first book in their new series after they finally finished up The Expanse, which I need to get back into my reread. I stalled out after book 6, and I want to read the last 3 books and finally get to the last novella, which wraps up the whole thing. I still haven't read it. But anyway, yeah, Mercy of Gods. This is weirdly enough, the Expanse never really had aliens in it. I mean, it sort of did with the proto-molecule, which if you don't know what that is, that's fine. But this one is a straight up alien versus humans story, and I'm very excited about it. Biggest disappointment. So I pulled out several, and I don't own most of them anymore. I unhauled them. But I'm just going to go through real quick and say a little bit about what I rated it and why I was disappointed in it. First one I've got a physical copy of still because I haven't been able to unhaul this, even though it is the coveted first edition printing that is the indie published copy. I found this at Barnes & Noble actually, right before they pulled everything and stopped selling these for the traditionally published version. Anyway, I really didn't like this. I think I'm in the minority here. I thought it was really poorly written, and I thought that the characters were cardboard, and I didn't care about any of them. I just didn't care. It just did not work for me. It just totally missed the mark. And then the books that I've unhauled, Only Human is a huge disappointment for me, if only because book 1 and book 2 are so good, especially book 2. That book was banana pants, and then book 3 just kind of went. So I'm sad about it, and I unhauled that whole series this year, even though I thought I was going to keep it. Oh well. And then Divine Rivals, I thought I was going to love this because everyone was losing their minds over it last year, and the copies of the book go for crazy amounts of money, like the special editions, and I was like, well, this sounds really lovely and fun, and I just did not like it. I did not like the writing style. I wasn't into it. I DNF'd it. So, yeah, Divine Rivals, disappointment. And then the last one is The Fake Mate, which mostly I've pulled. This is by Lana Ferguson. I just thought this was just the most bland book, and it was not good, and it was not sexy. And also, I just wanted to talk a bit about how I think straight people have taken the Omegaverse and straightified it and kind of ruined it. This might be a controversial opinion, but the Omegaverse, I'm not going to go into what it is. You can look it up if you want to. But it was something invented by and for queer people. It is a queer fanfic thing, okay? And straight people have taken it and they've turned it into a gross, toxic masculinity, often why choose romances involved, masculine alpha male versus like the female is the omega. And I just think straight people, you've ruined it. You've taken something that was very, very, very weird and very queer, and you have made it the most straight thing ever. And I just am disgusted. I'm mad. I'm mad. Justice for the Omegaverse. I don't recommend this book. Biggest surprise. Okay, here we're going to talk about another self-pub book that has been picked up traditionally, and I jumped on the bandwagon this year with a bunch of other people, but it's been around since 2021, I think, and that is Dungeon Crawler Carl. This is the original cover. Actually, there's 2 original covers, and then this is the cover that's being published in August. And I was a bit wary of this series. By the way, public service announcement, the word wary means you're wary of something, like you're leery of it, you're suspicious, you're worried about it, okay? Is not the same thing as when you're weary of something. I see people say that all the time. I'm weary of this, like they're worried about it, but it's wary. You're wary of it. If you're wary of something, it means you're tired. Sorry, that's totally random. I'm a pedant at heart, and I need to correct people when they're wrong, and it's very difficult for me sometimes to be in the world. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Dungeon Crawler Carl. So I read this first book, and it was really fun. There was this one scene, though, that really threw me for a loop, and I didn't understand what he was going for, the author. But I've since read the second book in the series, and I feel like that one scene was a fluke, or it just didn't do what he wanted it to do. Overall, I think the intentions of this series are good. It is a satire of like consumerism and reality television, but it's also just a fun lit RPG where a man and his ex-girlfriend's cat are trapped in a worldwide dungeon that has been created by aliens under the earth, and everyone who isn't in this dungeon on earth has now died. And the aliens are televising this dungeon competition between the last remnants of humanity galaxy-wide, and it's a reality television competition where humanity is surviving. And so there's this weird combination of like, it's a game and it's funny, but also basically it's the whole human race has died because they were attacked by aliens who wanted to make money. I don't know. It's super weird. Also, the cat is the best character. I will talk about her later, but she can talk. Her name is Princess Donut. She is a Persian. This is how I picture her. I am obsessed with this series. If you are going to read it, I've pre-ordered the first 3 books in hardcover in the traditionally pub. They have not picked up books 4 through 7 yet. Book 7 is set to be published in October, independently still. But books 1 through 3 are coming out in August, September, and October if you want to read them. But I recommend, if you're going to read the series, you need to do the audio. Unless you have some sort of a like processing thing where you can't do books by audio, you need to do it by audio, because Jeff Hayes is the audiobook narrator, and the production quality of this audio, even though it is self-published, is intense. It's got sound effects, it's got this guy, he does the voices, and it enhances the experience. Like, I feel like I've given the books a full star extra because of how good his performance is. And I can see myself re-listening to them over and over again. Biggest surprise is Dungeon Crawler Carl. There you go. I've already blabbered so much, it's already at 22 minutes. Okay. Favorite new author. Okay, this is a good one. I think this author has one more book that I have not read yet, and one that is due to be published next year. But other than that, I've read all 3 of her published books this year. From January through like March, I think I read them. And that is Emily Austen. Her first book that hit pub wide was Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, which I loved. And then I read Interesting Facts About Space, which I also loved. And then I read her queer poetry collection about religion and queerness called Gay Girl Prayers, and I loved it as well. She made me love poetry. So she has like quickly become one of my very favorite authors. I will read anything that she writes. Such a good time. She often writes from a queer perspective and an autistic perspective. Both of the novels that I mentioned have queer autistic women as protagonists, and I just love her. She's one of my new favorites. Oh, newest favorite character. So I have 2. The first one, since I already talked about her, is Princess Donut from Dungeon Crawler Carl. So she is a Persian cat. Oh wait, hold on. So she is a Persian cat, and she was just a normal cat before this alien invasion, and she was living with Bee, her owner, and Bee's boyfriend, who is the main character, Carl, and she is staying with Carl while her mom is in Australia. Literally, as the alien invasion starts, Bee is on the other side of the world, and they're pretty sure she's dead. I don't know yet. She could pop up later in the series, but it's just Carl and Donut when the aliens attack, and they happen to be outside because Donut has escaped out the window when every single building is flattened, and anyone not inside gets to go in the dungeon. So Carl enters the dungeon in his pajamas, his boxers with hearts on them. That's why he's on the cover like that, with this cat. And then the cat levels up in the game and becomes a sentient being, and they like become best friends. And she is like the best because she's a cat. So like, imagine if a cat could actually talk, and like the feelings of superiority, and it's a Persian cat who's a show cat. Her real name, what's her real name? It's not, her full name is not Princess Donut. It's Princess something Donut. I don't remember. I'll put it down here if I can find it. So she actually has character growth. She's very uncaring of anyone but herself at the beginning, and then like she actually grows as a person. Anyway, and she has a pet velociraptor named Mongo. If you ever wanted to see a Persian cat have a pet dinosaur, this is the series for you. Oh, and then my new favorite human character, although the ladies in these books give them a run for their money, is Miles. Miles from Funny Story. Now, that is up there. I didn't want to get it. It was too high. So I'll just put the book up here. But every time I see someone say that they don't like Miles, I am flabbergasted. And then especially when they say that Miles and Daphne, the main character, don't have chemistry together, because their chemistry is undeniable. How one could not see, I mean, I feel like the people who don't like Miles are the type who also like the big, strong, masculine, gross men, because he is lovely. He is such a soft cinnamon roll of a man, and he's funny, and he cooks, and I don't know, I love him. He's very Nick Miller coded. And I love it so much. I just loved him so much. I don't know. There's no other way to say it. I love Miles. Okay, next up is a book that made you cry. Now, I went through all of the books. It doesn't take a lot to make me cry usually. I don't know what's going on with me, but there was only one out of all the books I've read so far this year, and that's Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. I don't know, like the religious catharsis / trauma catharsis that I felt while reading the end of this book, I just was on the same wavelength as it, and I just cried. I don't know, man. I swear I had other books that made me cry, but I didn't, I guess. I didn't have other books. It was just this one. It's a horror book about religious trauma. I don't know if it'll make anyone else cry, but it made me cry, so that's the answer for that one. Books that made you happy. Well, I already mentioned Funny Story. So good. Could quote the whole book. Couldn't actually quote it. I have a terrible memory, but I want to be able to quote the whole book. It's my new favorite Emily Henry book. It beats out Beach Read because of how funny it is and how messy Daphne and Miles are, separately and together. And then the other book that made me really happy was 10 Things That Never Happened by Alexis Hall, which is a romance about that it really shouldn't work. A boss and an employee, and the boss is an actual asshole, and the employee is extremely nice, and it involves extremely dubious fake amnesia plot. Everything Alexis Hall walks the line, and everything is great. I don't know how he did it. Those are usually two things that I'm like, what? If you're pretending to have amnesia, that's really shitty. And also a boss and an employee falling in love, that's also not great, but he does it. He makes it work. I don't know how he does it. Anyway, Gollum the cat is in this book. I don't know, it was lovely. It made me happy. The audiobook is amazing. Most beautiful book that you've bought this year. Now, I was going to have a hard time with this question until I received this book in the mail. And hands down, no question, this is the prettiest book that I've bought this year. And that's The Honey Witch. So this is just the normal cover. They changed some things, like they've recolored those flowers and made them more pink than yellow. This is much more yellow on the original cover, and they've softened it and they've made that gold, and that's pretty enough. But then you get to a honeycomb sprayed edge, which I love yellow. I love golden yellow. I love honeycomb. I love bumblebees. Those aren't bumblebees, they're honeybees, but still. The under dust jacket art is gorgeous. That is gorgeous. But the real killer for me is this cream gold foiled honey pot with the bees on this cloth bound cover with this. I don't know, man. It's just something about it speaks to me, and I love it so much. So much. I'm reading this right now. I'm about to start this. We'll see if I like it, and I really need to like it because this is so pretty. All right, and the last question before we get to stats. It's hot. What books do you need to read by the end of the year? Again, I have an entire TBR planned out through November, so all of those books. But these are 3 books that are not on my official TBR that I have been trying desperately to fit in, one of them for over a year. They're about to publish book 3, and I still haven't managed to read book 1, even though everyone says it's great and I'm going to love it. And that's the first one. There's 3 of them. They're all fantasy romances. The first one is The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, which apparently is an indescribable fantasy romance set in a very weird time period. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but apparently I'm going to love it. So I just haven't been able to get to it. And then these are two self-pubbed indie romances that are sequels to books that I read this year or the year before. And I've been trying to continue in both series, and it just hasn't happened. And the first one is Blood Solace, which is the second book in the Blood Mercy series. I own the entire series, 9 books right now, I think. And this is only book 2. I need to read it. And I've had it, and I just haven't been able to. I need to get to this. And then the second book in the Crowns of Nyaxia. This is the first duology, the second book. I need to finish this, The Asters and the Starcursed King, so I can read book 3 when it comes out in November. So that's my Midyear book freakout tag. Now let's move on to stats. So in terms of my reading, I have read a total, as of this filming, of 236 books. Here's the breakdown by month of the books I've read. And that's a lot. So now I'm at the end of June. I'm at the end of July as I'm filming this. So this is actually 7 months of books, not 6, because I didn't feel like going in and removing all the July books. Even though I only talked about January through June books in my questions. Like, there were some books from July I could have put in there, but I didn't because they're the second half of the year. But I just didn't feel like taking out from the numbers. It was too much work. So this is through July. I've read 236 books. So I'm on track to read over 450 books this year. What? That's legitimately wackadoodle. But again, I read audiobooks. So I'm like reading 2 or 3 books at the same time constantly, okay? I don't have a problem. Okay, so next thing is the books that I've read. Okay, so well, you can see this little thingy. So my best reading month was January. I have not managed to top 44 books read. I was just really raring to go. I was like on top of it. 44 books. June and July, I did read 37 and 35 books. So that's pretty good. March was my worst. So I don't know what was going on with me in March, but I've read at least 30 books every month this year. So I don't know. Looking at it like that, I'm like, is that weird? That's like more than 2 books a day. But again, I read audiobooks and hard copies at the same time. So audiobooks, man, they're killer. Next up, I've got my DNFs. So you can see these are here, I'll scooch even further over here. So these are the reasons I've DNF'd. So I talked about DNFing in my tag earlier. So I've DNF'd 33 books so far this year. That is a lot of books to DNF. But it has freed me up to read, and the DNFs are counted, by the way, in my total. So I've actually only read 203 books fully, but I'm counting the DNFs. So you can see the biggest reason that I have DNF books is low intrigue, which I interpret as this just hasn't caught me. I don't care what's going to happen. So I'm just going to put it down. But also sometimes it's that feeling of when you are reading a book and you're forcing yourself to read it. Yeah, I don't force myself anymore. So that's in there. Then we've got Everything is Sucky. I just like that one. This, by the way, is from G from Book Roast's spreadsheet. I use 2 spreadsheets because they both do things the other one doesn't do. I use G from Book Roast's call pile spreadsheet, and then I use Allie from Hardback Hoarder's 5-year spreadsheet thing that's awesome. But it doesn't have the call pile rating, and I really need that. And G's spreadsheet does some other stuff too. Anyway, I like spreadsheets. Don't know the reason is the next biggest. Don't like the art style, which I don't know why it doesn't just say style. Maybe I'll go in and fix that. There's only 2 that I just wasn't feeling, and I'll try another time. So I might come back to those. General apathy, don't care. Poor character development. And then 1 was triggers. Which book was that? It's going to bother me now. Oh, this is actually a book that I own and will come back to. So it actually fits into 2 categories, but that's not why I DNF'd it. So there's actually 3 books that I want to try another time for. So this book that is marked triggers on this graph is Exordia by Seth Dickinson, which is a book I was really enjoying in the first 20%, and then it just got really existential and it was really freaking me out. So I had to stop. But I fully plan on continuing, and I have actually a signed copy now because Seth was at the Tucson Festival of Books this year. Yeah, that's my DNFs. What's next? The genres I've read. So here's this chart. Here's all the genres. Now, the top 2 never change. Although last year I think they did change. Maybe they were. I don't remember where romance was but I read not as many romance last year as I had in previous years or this year. Anyway, fantasy is always my number 1 category, but other genres are now creeping in and taking over fantasy's majority share. But fantasy is still by far the biggest category of books that I read at 27%. See, I've read 65 fantasy books this year, and I count fantasy romance and all the different, like, under the umbrella of fantasy. Like, there's always a main genre for me and then a subgenre. So these are the main genres of the book. And fantasy is the biggest one that I've read. The second biggest, obviously, is romance. That's not always the case, as I was just babbling about. And then normally my third biggest genre is either sci-fi or mystery. But as you will see here, and this is a question I forgot to talk about in my tag, oops, I must have missed it, is what genres are you find yourself reading more of or leaning towards? And besides fantasy, horror is clearly up and coming, because I have read 12% of my books are horror, as opposed to 10% of science fiction and 6% of mystery. And then for some reason that is just creeping up. But then you can see that contemporary fiction, which in this spreadsheet is different from literary fiction, which actually I've read more literary fiction than I have contemporary, so that's weird. I don't know, but anyway, the biggest thing on here is that horror has overtaken science fiction and mystery, especially mystery. Usually mystery is my third, and I'm not reading as many mysteries this year as I am horrors. So I don't know what that says about me, but I've replaced horror with mystery, although I still love mystery. But a lot of the mysteries I've been reading maybe are in their primary genre is not regular mystery. Like, one of my favorite books this year that I almost made this tag is The Tainted Cup, which is a mystery book, but it is primarily a fantasy. So I categorized it in here as fantasy. So this is what happens when you're a genre mash reader, when you like multiple genres, is that all of your genres are not always represented. So anyway, I've been babbling enough about genre. And then the last thing I wanted to look at was my star ratings. So as you can see, primarily, I always get 4 stars is my most frequent rating. That hasn't changed, although the percentage of those 4 stars has gone down because I'm becoming a more critical reader. So the 3-star ratings, which used to be a lot lower than that, are now at 26%. And then I have 10% is 2 stars, and I've only had one 1-star book so far this year. Wait, that's not right. Did I forget to mark one of the books? Stop, honey. She's eating my books again. I think I forgot to mark a book 1 star in this spreadsheet because I think I've had 2 now. I'll figure it out later. And then my 5 stars are at 16%, which I think is good because it's the third, meaning I'm reading a lot of books that I love, but I'm not giving too many 5-star ratings. So, okay, so that's my stats. And then I am going to take a break because I have to feed these cats. I just realized I filmed my whole last video in the wrong resolution, so sorry if it's not as good as usual. I mean, not that it's great normally, because it's just a phone, not a camera. So yeah, thank you for watching my video. I don't know, I'm playing with this cat toy. Here, you want this, baby? If you've made it to the end of this video, yeah, I know I hate this part too. I hate it. I hate it. If you've made it to the end of this video, please don't forget to give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to. And I would really appreciate it. It really helped me out. By the way, the last video gained me like 100 new followers, so that was weird. Thank you, new followers. Welcome. I hope that I don't disappoint you. I don't do that all the time. If you don't have anything to say about any of these books, or anything you've been reading, or if you've done a tag or whatever, which you can also leave down below, then please leave me some sort of a flower. Maybe if there's a red flower, leave that for In the Warm Hands of Ghosts. And I will see you guys in the next one. Okay, love you, bye.